In this video, we will be demonstrating the HA feature inside of Genian NAC. Here you'll see we have VM Workstation. Inside of VM Workstation we have two VM guest machines that are currently up and running. One is the master, 192.168.155. The second is a slave, 192.168.150. Both of these machines are presently powered on. First, we will take a look at the configurations. If we look at the master configuration, we'll see several components inside of the configuration that are required for HA. These three lines are required for data server enable and configuration. Then we have, in addition to the rest of the configurations, several HA commands here that you'll see, including the HA group. So this is the group that the two nodes participating in HA belong to. Priority will be 200. This will be higher on the master, which will allow it to take over. And a virtual IP of 1.60. In addition to that, there are three log server commands that are required, which include a cluster name and three cluster peers, which are the master IP, the slave IP, and the virtual IP. We'll take a look at the slave configuration now. Here are the data server commands. Here are the HA commands. You'll notice the HA group is also 100, which matches the master. The priority is 100, which is lower, meaning the master will take priority. And of course the virtual IP of 1.60. And then here are the three log server commands with the cluster name and the three cluster peers. We'll take a look at a couple of other displays here. The show HA status command shows that 55 is presently the master. And here's the virtual IP, of course, which is 1.60. And if we look at the slave, showing up as a status of slave, so 1.50 is the slave. If I look at the ETH0 interface, those of you familiar with VRRP may recognize this. This is a VRRP virtual MAC address. You'll see that also reflected here. And you will see, in addition to 155, that there is a 1.60 IP address here showing up as the secondary for ETH0. Now let's take a look at the slave. So the biggest difference here is we have the actual MAC address showing up both here and down here. And then also there's a global ETH0 but no secondary ETH0. So this is the normal state we would expect things to be in. Let's take a look inside the UI. We have the master here. We have 10 policies here. I have created a policy to help differentiate the master from the slave when we start to access the UI with the virtual IP. So I've created an extra policy, test policy, for us to be able to determine this is the master. In the slave, which is .50, you'll notice there's only 9 policies. So the default policies are here, but the test policy is missing, which is intentional. What we'll do now is we will go ahead and we're going to suspend the master. Slave is still accessible. I can no longer access the master via PuTTY. Now you'll notice that the slave has become the master. So the .50 is now the master. If I look at ETH0, we'll see now that the real MAC address is gone and the VRP virtual MAC address is reflected. In addition to that, we see the .60 here as the secondary ETH0 address, which is expected for a master VRP node. So what we'll do now is we will access the virtual IP for UI. Disconnect previous sessions, log in. Okay, now you remember how we were able to differentiate if I navigate to policy, enforcement policy. You'll notice now that the test policy that I configured on the master, that is not here. So we know for a fact that this is actually the other node, the .50, which actually displayed this information under the enforcement policy originally. And of course, here's the .55, which showed the test policy. So we've validated that HA fails over properly, and that when you access the UI with the virtual IP, you're actually accessing the slave server. So what we'll do now is reverse this. We're going to go ahead and resume the master, which we have suspended. Okay, so here's the slave. We'll look at the HA status. So it's back to slave status as we would expect. So the .50 node is back to a slave status. We'll go ahead and log back in again. To the master. Which of course was showing up as the master status as we would expect. Again, we'll look at the ETH0 interface on the master. It shows the VRP virtual MAC address here, and it'll show the 60 address here, the virtual address as the secondary ETH0. We go back to the slave, and we see the real MAC address has been restored. And also we see that there is no .60 here, no secondary ETH0. So everything looks as expected. Now we'll go ahead and log back in to the 160. Now remember, when we were logged into the slave using the virtual IP, we did not have our test policy. There was only 9 enforcement policies present. We'll refresh this. Okay, we'll disconnect previous sessions. Now, if this is the master as we anticipated, then when we go to enforcement policy, we should see our test policy, and there it is. So that is how you configure and test HA failover and Genian NAC. This video did not include replication, so the next video we have will cover the replication portion of HA. Thank you for watching.